It's about Esmerald and Lilya, how to speed up the development process, and it's by Tiago Silva and Pedro Correia.
So a disclaimer, we don't work for Pydantic. We just like Pydantic. So Esmerald and Lilya are two Python frameworks developed 2 years ago. Lilya more recently, that they were aimed to actually address our issues, basically marrying business and development, and provide some modern ways of approaching software development. Basically, like you have in Fast API, you have other tools. We thought something very similar, but more business oriented. This was, like I mentioned, 2 years ago. We just sat and Pedro thought, okay, we need to use 5 or 6 different type of packages to address one single problem. And just out of, I would say fun, but kind of fun, we decided, what if we build our own? And of course, a lot of people might think, oh, another framework. Yes, but this one is actually really cool. This one here, one of the sources of inspiration for Esmerald was Django. I was a heavy Django developer, and also used Flask and some Bottle and some other frameworks. One thing that I love about Django is the syntax. It's very simple. It's keep it simple, and you can just spin up a simple service in 10 minutes. The problem of Django, it comes with a lot of batteries that majority of the people at the moment don't use it because we don't need it. So, now, when you use Django, majority of people use Django REST framework with DRF Spectacular, like Cindy contributed. Thank you for that. And one of the things that we thought was, can we just bring the simplicity of Django in syntax and marry the current ASCII ecosystem with the nice look and feel of Django development? We gave it a try.
Okay. For anyone who has used Django, one of the things that we find it useful is the command line structure to create projects, the commands it has. We decided to take the same approach when designing Esmerald and Lilya. So we have these commands, as we call them, directives, that allow to speed up development project. For instance, we have the create project directive, which creates a sort of a boilerplate for the project, including already a proposed structure. You're not limited to it, but it's the one we recommend. And without it, you also can have directives to create apps, including with some nice features as already with configuration ready for deployment. Nginx, so reverse proxy, server-side cache. And this is what you get from that boilerplate. So essentially, you have an apps directory is where you're going to put your code. The configs, we inspired heavily on Django settings mechanism. So we also have centralized in a file, although you have the possibility to pass it through the object or through a file. We also have some others like main or serve. Serve is a file that we have so far, but it's going to be discontinued as we're going to replace by directives. We're going to be talking about them later. So, sort of a quick comparison between Django and the Esmerald ecosystem. We decided to bring in the best Django had, including that it was included in some other libraries. For instance, the OpenAPI, the permissions that we had scattered throughout library, we decided to bring them into Esmerald as a native included. So we have native client, as I told you, the commands. We have a permission system. We're going to be talking about them as well. Middleware interceptors, the encoders, and there's a lot more in it. Regarding the programming style, we support both, for in case people prefer functional or OOP style. And following now the syntax.
One of the things that Pedro mentioned regarding directives, we'll be talking a little bit more about this later. One of the things that Esmerald supports, and again, in another slide we'll go more into more detail, is how can we actually make all of these niceties of middlewares, interceptors, permissions, and yet still maintain the same structure and pattern design as Django has. So this is how you normal build. This is from the Django documentation. So this is how you build a normal view in Django and using Django REST framework. So quite simple, quite basically you define the verb. In this case, is the head. You return the response. Game on. In Esmerald, it's very, very similar. Of course, what we have here you can see that from book models, import book. This is another an ORM from the ecosystem that we use called Edgy, but just for the example purposes, this is how you build also the same view, but using Esmerald in ASCII. So again, we try to keep it as simple as possible. What Esmerald does that Django doesn't is we enforce when you declare what we call a handler or an API in other terms, we enforce the return signature. And this is important because we actually want to understand which type of internally which type of response you're trying to build. If you don't pass anything, it will raise an error saying you need to actually declare the types. So we enforce the typing here. This option can be disabled via settings. We don't advise. It still works, but probably it's better if you just don't. This is something we thought, okay, there are certain things that imagine an application when you have the layers of, okay, you have the app, you have the middlewares, and you have the endpoint, or the handle, like we call it here. Based on aspect-oriented programming, there is a concept called interceptors. And what is this interceptor? It's basically when you receive a request that goes through all the middlewares and validations, and before hitting the API, you can actually add an extra logic, for instance, logging. You might want to do something else. You might actually want log some data in Logfire. Again, they're not paying us for this, but we actually use for this as well. And this, we thought, the best way to separate the code by responsibilities is basically to provide these tools without you thinking too much. Although, again, it's not mandatory for you to use. We just provide you to work out of the box. An example of the interceptor, and now, actually, I need to go here, this is how you can actually declare a simple interceptor. Again, syntax, we try to keep it as simple as possible. You basically declare a simple Python class, and you just inherit from the Esmerald interceptor, and you declare an async intercept. This intercept internally, Esmerald has a lot of magic. We'll understand, okay, if this intercept exists, I will just execute it. And this, basically, of course, here I'm just putting logger info, and in fairness, it's because the slide is quite small. I couldn't put something very big here. And basically, we declare the interceptor, and this is how you declare in a handler. So basically, as you see, an Esmerald, the way you declare in the last line 20, no, line 11. You see here, an interceptors. Just that. This is on application. This is on a gateway level. So Esmerald works on a layer in layers. Works in app. Works. Then you have the routes. Then you have the gateway. And then you have the handler. And you might ask, why so many layers? Because you can have, because of what is coming now, the permissions, directives, and everything in Esmerald is extremely modular. So we thought I might want to do an interceptor that is basically on an include level, containing many routes. Like a container. I want this interceptor to be available to everything, or I just want this interceptor to be available in this handler, in this API. So that's the modularity that Esmerald provides. And then you have something that was one of the reasons why Lilya was born in the first place. Historically speaking, Esmerald was actually built on top of Starlet. Fantastic framework. Actually, we have even one of the core maintainers here. Here we go. And we decided, because there was an issue that we needed to take out of Esmerald some of the things that we thought would be nice to have outside of a fully fledged framework. Of course, we didn't want to bother and bloat Starlet with ideas that was not the scope of Starlet in the first place. So we kind of, based on Starlet in terms of API, we brought Lilya in, and we added the niceties that we want to take out of Esmerald, such as the include, which is in the documentation, is quite complex, but basically it's a cool object. The encoders, what they do is, Esmerald at the moment natively supports Pydantic and supports mention spec. So you can just declare structs and models, and it will recognize them in the Open API, and it will recognize them basically anywhere in the code. So it's not only entangled to one thing. But we thought, but what if I want to support something else? There are people that use attributes, an old library, but still quite widely used. So do I need to rewrite the whole Esmerald core just to make it compatible with the attributes? No. So this is where the encoders get in. We call encoders. There was a debate about the name, but just keep it simple and short. An encoder is basically this. How do you make Esmerald compatible with attributes? So there is this class called encoder that you simply inherit from the Esmerald encoders, which is on the top of Lilya, and you just declare isType, serialize, and encode. So basically, isType is just checking, is this object of type identic, or is this object of type attributes? So usual attributes provide you exactly this function has to basically check if it's a subclass or the type of the attribute itself. The serialize is converting basically into a JSON compatible structure, and the encode is bring back to the same type of object. So from JSON to the class of type the attributes provide. It does this for Pydantic, does this for message spec. This example is actually now in unit testing, so it also works for attributes. And this is how you make any library that you want to integrate with Esmerald compatible with Esmerald. And with this, basically, that's how you declare the encoder in Esmerald. That's it. You create a class, you add it there into that list, automatically the application will understand from now on I want to use attributes or any other library at your choice.
Just one thing to add. This is also allows us for fully, if you want to create an encoder specific for a specific need, that's why this was designed this way, so that we can decouple every validation schema or even serialization from the core of the framework.
Forgot about this slide. This one here, basically, is the example after being declared. This case was the attributes. Again, this is in documentation. You can just basically copy and paste. This is how you declare, according to their documentation, a class of type using the attributes and does the validations and all of that. And this basically is how you declare an handler or an API, last endpoint that recognizes the type item of the object and will automatically, okay, this API doesn't do anything, you just post and then return the same data. But basically, it will understand the type of object. You don't need to actually do a lot of magic, try to deserialize, try to parse it. Automatically, the encoder will do that for you. So you can just focus on what's really matters instead of just, oh, I need to serialize and serialize. How do I do this? No need. Esmerald is already doing it for you.
This is one of the things we decided to include in the core of Esmerald and Lilya, which is the concept of permissions. One of the things that we need to make the observation is that despite being the same concept, they serve the same thing, they're implemented in two very different ways, in Lilya and in Esmerald. While in Lilya is essentially a NASG app, in Esmerald, it's a more application-oriented. One of the things is that you can apply permissions, just as Tiago said, to multiple layers of the application. You can apply to the application wide, to the routes, or even to the handler. We come with some permissions built in, as for instance, the authentication, the block all or deny all, or allow all. And you can develop them using a composite. So you can have higher level and then go into detail for specific APIs using inheritance for that. As I told you, Lilya works in a different way. It was designed after Esmerald, so Esmerald started first, then we decided to build the toolkit Lilya, and that's why we decided to build as an ASCII app. As you can see, this is an example where we return the ASCII app in case it's valid, or we'll return in this case, the exception. On Esmerald, it's a more application level, so it's essentially very similar to other frameworks. You call specific methods, it's valid or is authenticated, And this is how you implement it.
You can scroll here.
Yeah. Okay, it's better. As I told you, it also allows for a certain composite. So you can have a based validation class, and then you can create subclasses, for instance, for specific validations. And then you can also put them everywhere where you want. This comes built in the framework, so no package is required. Yeah, actually, that was the point I was talking. In this case, we are applying to the gateway, and you can also apply it to the API levels, or in this case, even to the calls.
One thing that is important to mention, and we were asked this before, so this permission system of Lilya, what does it differ from a middleware? Well, the answer is the concept. What is permission should live in permission side, what is middleware should be on middleware side. It's more separation of concerns. But in terms of syntax, it's roughly the same, and it was intentional. Pluggables. So pluggables is actually quite of a thing that we actually thought Flask was really good. So one of the things that we like about Django is when you declare an app, you need to put it in installed apps in order to understand the models you are declaring there, and whatever that app itself is going to be used across the whole platform. In Esmerald, we don't have that because we don't need that. So but we need to understand, what if I want to create something and I want to just I don't want it as a package. I don't want a PyPy installer, but I want to integrate, or maybe I do want, but I want to integrate into the platform in a seamless way. So Django has installed apps, and it works really well, but it wasn't working for our use case. But Flask has the extensions. So we thought, okay, this sounds reasonable. So let's create something similar, an extension of of the Flask idea applied to Esmerald. So for those familiar with basically any Flask application with init. This is slightly simpler, but the purpose is roughly the same. So pluggables, like everything in Esmerald, you can just declare it anywhere in the layer. In the route, include, application is your choice. So, but in this case, the pluggable is quite exceptional because you want the pluggable to be wide, to be application wide, not on a handler itself. So this is usually how you can declare an example, or you can declare a pluggable. Now, this one here doesn't do anything, but there is a package called Esmerald Simple JWT, which is, again, just a package created for Esmerald to manipulate JWTs that is actually used as a pluggable. So this you declare, you inherit from the extension class. And then you can pass basically everything, every parameter you want there. And then you need to declare an extend function. In this case, it's an extend or async extend, supports both. The extend is where the logic is going to be, is what you want to do here. In the Esmerald Simple JWT package, what we do is we basically declare the middlewares, the pluggables we want to pass into the extension, and we just have a configuration object, in this case using Pydantic, for us to pass I don't know, the signature, the algorithm, the dates, everything that is needed to generate the JWT. And we simply, after doing that, we simply use like this. We inherit from a pluggable main object, and we pass it into the pluggables property inside Esmerald. That's it. It will install it for you. It will work out of the box. It simply just works. Now, you might ask, but why pluggables and not installables? Because we thought it was cool. But no, joking. But it's more because we know sometimes you installing, having Python packages for simple things might be too much overkilling, and these pluggables allow you internally, which happened before, to share code across teams without actually publishing a package. So this was one of the reasons that the pluggables came to be. Directives. So this is actually quite a thing. For those familiar with management commands in Django, it's similar. So Pedro mentioned before, we had the serve.py file. That serve.py was we had a make file that was generating some code for you to start your development process. And we just thought, yeah, this serve.py needs to go. So we created directives, which is basically like Django management commands. Literally, you run commands on a command line. Here is where Django installed apps actually plays the role, because if you have a management command in Django, but inside an app that is not declared installed apps, you won't be able to execute it because it does not recognize the app. Esmerald is a little bit more agnostic to that. So there is also in documentation, but there is a specific pattern that you can follow, and it works on a first found, first executed basis type of directive. We call it a directive because it's exactly that. It's a directive. It's just basically execute some piece of code in the command line, like the classic example we are about to show you here. You might want to run some. You created your own application, you want to run some database operations, for instance, create a super user, and you don't want to go through the database and try to do all of these operations when you can do in a simple Python script. Directives we have natively, we have the run server. And that's why the service is going away, because the run server runs internally for development purposes, uses UVcorn. Uses UVcorn, and it just works amazingly well, and there is no reason to reinvent the wheel. And we just thought we want, like we always said, we want to bring the nice development experience into Esmerald for those that work with other more mature frameworks, like I did. So this is an example also in the documentation. I use it quite a lot. So this is how you declare a directive. So you inherit from the base directive, which is now native from Lilya. It was initially native from Esmerald. And basically you have the helper, like it's a simple string. You have the arguments using argparse. You declare whatever you want to declare. This directive actually works. After you declare, you have this handle function. Again, might sound familiar. You can have a single asynchronous def handle or an async def handle, because it depends on the operations you want to do. So here you have simple Python execution code. Here, basically, this user query create super user is actually part of the Esmerald contrib integration with Edgy and Sapphire, and automatically I just create my super user basically through the command line. Now, how can I run this? Like this. So Django itself, you can just do, I think it's Django admin, and you just run the management command. Here you need to specify Esmerald run. The run is a directive to run directives. Kind of a directive inception here, but yes. So they basically say Esmerald run, and you say run this directive and call it super user. The super user is the name of the file called superuser.py. If you call it create user, is the name of the file, is the name you need to put it there without the py. And you pass the parameters. And that's it. And you will just execute the script for you.
So overall, this is what you can get from Esmerald and Lilya. Everything is made in module way, so exceptions, middlewares, interceptors, they can be applied to several layers of the application, routes, handlers, gateways. The other is the context object. I think this must be familiar to you. Instead of just receiving the request in the handler, you also get a more composable object. As you can get a request, you can get the API of the handler itself. So you get a lot of the information in case you need to get to manipulate more data. Layer dependency injection is very similar to what you use as traditional dependency injection, but also apply on multiple levels. One of the things, we also have support for sync and async servers, so Esmerald can run on both. One of the things that I haven't put here is also that Esmerald is part of a bigger ecosystem. So we also have our own ORM, Edgy, as Thiago mentioned, as long as a specific async schedule called async-z. And we also have an API documentation tool with support with Swagger, Redoc, OpenAPI, Spotlight, and RapidDoc.
here in the point number 5 is quite important. Okay, let's be honest. The biggest framework here supporting this auto-generated documentation was FastAPI. It was the pioneer. So we thought it works, so we want that as well. But there is one big difference here in what we do. And the only difference is not because our documentation is better, because it's not. It's just OpenAPI. But because of these encoders, you might think, okay, we use Pydantic internally to generate the documentation. It works really, really well. But what we do is, what if Pydantic works with Pydantic? But what if I want to use a message spec or attributes? Will Pydantic recognize it? Because attributes and structs are not base models. So one of the things that the encoders also do internally is when you declare that specific thing, that specific type, we have some Pydantic mechanisms to generate internal models for representation that will recognize whatever you declare in a new encoder. So the OpenAPI will always be in sync with whatever you want to use. Of course, now we kept Swagger, Redux, Toplight, RapidDoc. I think if another 5 or 6 come out, I don't think we'll integrate them because it's a lot of documentation. But these are the ones being now used by the people, by the community. And we just thought it's nice to give them natively into Esmerald.
And this essentially, we like to thank to these projects. They were the ones who inspired us into building this. We wanted to take the adventure that each one of them offered so that we could build. For instance, we inspired heavily on Django. That was essentially the framework we decided to rely on. Instead of building something from scratch, we wanted something that was fast to create and fast to deploy an app, and that served. Starlet served as our foundation for a long time until Lilya came along. It became the backbone of the entire ecosystem. And FastAPI, because as Tiago mentioned, the way it produced the documentation, it serves kind of fast to create the APIs. It was served kind of something we needed to ensure so that developers could easily document their development. And without them, we wouldn't have this developed. So we owe all thanks to them.
One of the things that is also important to mention, that Esmerald or Lilya are not here to replace anything. It's not better than anything else. It's just an alternative for if you are looking for something extra that you might find hard to find in other parts. If this can help you, great. Cindy mentioned before, which I liked a lot, is the community. Without them, and we have an active community, mostly on the edgy side, we wouldn't be able to even be here in the first place. I'm also part of other communities. I learn a lot every day, and one of the things that we were asked a lot was, are you trying to replace anything? And the answer is always no. We're not trying to replace anything. We are just providing an alternative. And we know how powerful other frameworks are and what they are here to offer. And we're not here to try to dethrone them, not in any way, shape, or form. We're just trying to show you, like, hey, we also exist. If you want to play around and join us, by all means, do it.
Thank you, Tiago and Pedro, for the talk. Now, again, questions for the team.
Thank you for the talk. I might have missed this, but what's the actual difference between Esmerald and Lilya, or how do I choose between them?
Okay, no, this is a very good question. So Lilya is is the foundation of Esmerald. So is what actually makes Esmerald work, operate, is the engine. Initially was everything in Esmerald, but we decided because it's getting too bloated to maintain, and sometimes you might not need an open API, you might not need interceptors, none of that. You just want something, keep it simple, and also with some niceties like the native client, the directives. So here is where Lilya positions themselves. It's just basically, initially Esmerald was built on top of Starlet, and we just thought, okay, now we have Lilya, let's take Starlet out. And the API is compatible, that is intentional, because we're not here to replace Starlet. We just need to add something extra. You just replace Lilya for Starlet with Lilya, and became basically the bare bone and the scaffold of Esmerald.
Just to add, a lot of the features you saw, they're also available on Lilya. Esmerald delegates to them. It just gives them a more structured application development.
Any more questions?
Hello. I wanted to ask when was the point that you decided that it was best to make a new repository versus adding to the Django community and enriching what already exists? Why did you decide to start something new?
That is a very good question. So, mature frameworks like Django, they have already processes in place. We can just not get there. We're talking about almost 20 years of code base in Django. It's not easy to get there and make it happen. Or even go, for instance, to one of the maintainers of Starlet and tell him, hey, would you mind adding a native client? Why is that? Because there is already a process in place and there is a community behind that actually did not need that. For us, was more, and my personal experience was I was working with some clients back in UK, where they were using a lot of tools they weren't supposed to be used, but because it was Django, we need to use it to address just to build simple APIs. It was basically going to a gunfight with a nuke, and it just wouldn't make any sense. And the level of frustration that I was actually facing, because it was literally frustration that I was having, made me talk to Pedro, which he works in a different area in the tech industry, and debating with him, thinking, hey, what if I think if you could build this, if I could have this in this way, this will solve my problem. We could just remove all of this unnecessary piece of junk. There is no other word but junk, and keep it simpler and cleaner and possibly maintainable. Possibly, because by that time we didn't build anything. It was when Esmerald was born, but it was actually initially with this name. Then with Lilya was more. Esmerald was becoming. I wouldn't say too big, but it was becoming big enough for us to understand this could be useful. Not everyone needs everything in Esmerald. Like, no, not everyone needs everything in Django. What if we just remove the core parts, the engine, basically, what makes a micro framework, and add the niceties that we have in Esmerald to it, and we just basically start cleaning the code base before it reaches the community in levels that we cannot do this the way we could. It was when actually Lilya came out. So the decision of creating a repo depends. If you might want to create you might want to just create a pet project, and from that pet project actually become something. I remember building Django fast utils a few years ago. I also created the Django tenancy, multi-tenancy URL, because the Django tenancy wasn't delivering what I needed by that time. It's basically what I think it was essentially a pet project initially, and then we just thought, hey, this is cool. Let's put this outside. Let's see what happens. And yeah, for now, of course, we don't. You won't see a lot of adverts from Esmerald because we don't want to hype on something that is not there. We are organically getting people contributing, nice people actually giving amazing proposals, and we just take them in and we just learn. Because even if we were the creators, and we are the initial creators, because now it's community driven, 100%. we are aware there are a lot of people with a lot more experience than us, and for us it's great to have conversations like we have in our Discord with people with 25, 30 years of experience suggesting things that we haven't even considered. That's all. That's why we thought.
Sounds good.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so hello everyone. Thank you for your contribution. It looks amazing. One question that I have specifically is like taking in consideration, for example, JavaScript or other platforms that have a lot of frameworks like are launching every week, for saying the joke. How you are kind of expecting the community to start using Esmerald. And also, on the other hand, you mentioned that you're focused mainly on some sort of businesses that have specific needs. So you are kind of giving extra support, how you've seen the community kind of contributing there. Maybe what are the use cases that you would recommend Esmerald is the better choice, for example, comparing with Django or FastAPI or other frameworks that you've mentioned already?
So, good question. So, one thing, you actually reminded me of a song inspired by from Billy Joel. We will let's build a framework. And yes, it's expected because it's expected people thinking, oh, Python is becoming like JavaScript. There is a framework every week. Yes, okay, we knew that, but it wasn't the purpose to. We want to replace something. This was again initially was just something trying to address our problems. We couldn't show this here today, but last year we actually did. We had the thing inside Esmerald that some people in Python call DTO. I came from Java in the beginning of my career, so I called it DAO, so Data Access Object. So we have this interface or protocol in Esmerald that incentivizes, it's not mandatory obviously, pushes you to decouple what is business logic and business objects from the controller or the view and delegate that to it. And the view should only receive like a payload sent to the business object, and then from there on does what needs to be done. This was what we thought initially. It exists in Esmerald. I use that a lot. In terms of use cases, again, FastAPI is a fantastic framework, but again, there's a massive community, so there's a lot of processes in place, and I'm pretty sure the team behind FastAPI is overwhelmed with a lot of the PRs they are receiving. In this case, we actually are kind of lucky because we are not even close as big as FastAPI, so we have this freedom to experiment a little bit. So what when it comes to the routing, which for me is the one. I'm 100% sure, or 99.9% sure that you somehow someday you had this partial imported error in Python. You have a file that imports another file exactly. So this was one of the reasons why we built this include object, which allows you to import like you do in FastAPI or in Django, but also allows you to import via string. So you actually don't have this issue anymore. So the routing system for us was crucial in terms of, was more for organization purposes, don't get me wrong. And it works, and then grew into something else, something slightly bigger. The use cases is basically is just because you build function-based views, for instance, like you do in maybe even LeadStar, that doesn't mean you cannot have. I think one of the biggest problems of developers is code organization, is where the file should be. And then you start growing in another file. And in every project, there is always two files, a utils and a helpers. No? It's always there. So this type of things start growing, and then you start losing track. What Esmerald doesn't enforce, but tells you in the documentation is more, there is a way you can actually, we suggest for you to do this. If you follow these patterns, but again, it doesn't break the application, but if you follow these patterns, you might be able to actually get into what you want to get. That directive of create project, which is clearly based on the start project from Django, gives you that structure, including a folder called apps. Apps is basically just controllers, serializers, schemas, is whatever you want to put there, but gives you that structure saying everything that is going to be controller or even business objects regarding, for instance, accounts or payroll. I can just isolate them and still call it inside Esmerald through a simple include import system. And this way, you can just decouple your code and delegate. For example, you might have a team building one Esmerald, And you might have another team building another Esmerald which does something else. This, and thanks to Starlet and the team from Starlet, they build this middleware, the ASCII, this WSGI middleware, and the way they do the integrations. You can just mount Esmerald into another Esmerald without even knowing without even talking to each other. It's just going to work. So this is what I try. It's more organizational, business-oriented mindset than actually the code itself, because code is code. You can just simply import the HTTP library from Python and go from there if you want to. It's just, yeah, this was more, because Pedro works more on the business side. I'm more on application level side. And he brought a lot of these business ideas into Esmerald, besides a lot of things he did, obviously. But this one here was crucial because he has his exposure into the business side, where what people coding for business think that usually people building software don't. And we try to integrate that in Esmerald.